Hello and welcome to the latest from Hearts Standard. My name is Joe Sked, and joining me for this Conference League special to provide the lowdown on German side Heidenheim is host of Gegenpressing podcast dedicated to covering all things German football, as well as UK league content manager for Transfer Market, Stefan Bienkowski. How's it going, Stefan?
I'm very well, Joe. I'm glad to be on the show. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. I am glad to have you, and I'm very much looking forward to Thursday night game, and that's why we kind of reached out to yourself for the inside scoop on Hearts' opponents. You've covered German football for more than 10 years now, so you will be able to provide that insight into Heidenheim. But before I start asking you questions, I do have a message from our sponsors. Good Vibes Giveaways are proud to sponsor Hearts Standard and offer fantastic prizes to fans of the club. Prizes change weekly and include tech gadgets, days out, weekends away, tax-free cash, and even OASIS tickets. Get your tickets now at www.goodvibesgiveaways.com and enter for your chance to spread the good vibes. Now, Stefan, jumping straight in, I suppose like I said, you covered German football for a number of years, but Heidenheim are a name who I was going to describe them as unfashionable, but I think that might be a bit harsh. But they're not one of the country's biggest names. They've only came to prominence probably for people that don't really pay too much attention to German football or the Bundesliga. In the last couple of years, they've had quite a really a wonderful story almost. Could you tell us a wee bit about just kind of their background and kind of a brief summary on where they came from and where they are now?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be absolutely amazed if most of your followers or viewers even knew who they were, to be honest with you. And that's not a slight on your followers. It's just a simple case that they are a bit of a Cinderella story in German football. They've came from utter obscurity, going back to the third or fourth tier in German football. And they've just kind of done that kind of football manager absolute dream. Frank Schmidt's been at the club for about 20 years now, and he just has quite literally guided them up one season after another. Obviously not consecutively, obviously, but they eventually got back into the Bundesliga, or to the Bundesliga, should I say, sorry. And they took it by quite some surprise last season, which is, of course, why they're now in the Conference League. But yeah, they are a small club. Frank Schmidt's been there for 23 years, I think. I think he is the longest serving head coach in Europe's top 5 leagues, if I'm not mistaken. And, it's something that does happen probably more often in German football than it does elsewhere, where you do kind of have these head coaches who do just kind of bunker down at these kind of regional clubs, and, they just kind of become part of the furniture. Christian Streich was at Freiburg for a similar time until he stepped down last year. So it's kind of common in German football, where clubs just quite happily stay these head coaches. And in this instance, Heidenheim have managed to kind of ride that wave all the way to the top tier, and now in European football.
I suppose the best question to ask on that kind of Cinderella story is how did they do it? Because, like you said, it's not been one of those that you sometimes see where it's just promotion after promotion after promotion. I think it's 6 promotions, but across those, maybe since 2007. So how have they done it, and what is the manager? What's the manager like, and how has he been a part of that?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously makes sense to say that he's obviously been the kind of the linchpin behind it all, much like Christian Streich of Freiburg, actually, where players have come and gone, and he's kind of been the steady kind of constant at the club. Tactically, they're very, I'd say, quite straightforward, very rigid, counter-attacking football, fire it down both wings, swing it into the box, hope the big man fires into the back of the net. And I know that sounds very rudimentary, but that is what brought them so much success last season. They had basically a front three of Jan Niklas Besta, who moved on to Benfica in the summer, who was a left winger. And he was working so well, he almost got a call up for the national team because he's just so many assists, great set piece taker as well. On the right, they had Aaron Dinky, really impressive young winger, who actually then moved to Freiburg this summer. And up front, they had Kleindienst, who's this kind of big number 9, very classic kind of target man. And then, an interesting thing is that a lot of these players obviously had a very strong bond with the head coach. For example, Kleindienst, who moved to Gladbach this summer, was actually offered the move 12 months ago. So last year, And he basically said, no, you know what? I'm a bit of a journeyman. I'm in my mid to late 20s. And the only reason I'm here in the Bundesliga is because this head coach, Frank Schmidt, believed in me. He took me to the top tier. I want to do what I can for him in the Bundesliga. So he stayed for an extra season, scored a bucket load of goals for them, helped them get to where they finished the league last season in European qualification, and then moved on in the summer there. And that's kind of probably the kind of prologue to where they are right now, because they are having issues this season. They're not quite the same team. Frank Schmidt was all very happy and smiles last season, where he's getting a little bit nippy this year with the media. And it's mostly down to those three players in particular moving on. It was a very good squad. It happens in football all the time, where you just have the right blend of people come at the right time under the right head coach. They all took the club to incredible success, but as seems to be the case in modern football, that's when bigger clubs come along and start picking away at them.
Yeah, because one of my questions was about the transfer window in the summer. I think it was The Athletic said they had the worst transfer window in the Bundesliga. You mentioned that they'd lost the three key players, two of which brought in a fair bit of money. You did talk about the impact they had last season. What about the way the new players have come in, how they've settled in, just how what are the kind of key issues that maybe has been a lasting effect into this season, where they started well but it's kind of tailed off recently?
Yeah, it absolutely has. They lost at the weekend there to Holstein Kiel, who are undoubtedly the worst team in the league. I think it was the first win of the season actually in the Bundesliga for Kiel. And they are, without, overbuttering, they're just cannon fodder this year, Holstein Kiel. So for them to actually pick up a win against Heidenheim at the weekend was quite significant. And it came just a few days after Heidenheim were knocked out of the cup, the German Cup, to a team in the second division. And that's probably a good way of kind of looking at why their season's having a bit of, the wheels are maybe falling off it so far, because they're obviously playing in Europe, the German Cup as well. Germany doesn't have a League Cup, so it's just a one cup competition, and in the Bundesliga itself. And the interesting thing was, after that kind of cup game where Schmidt did try to rest a few players and bring in some youth players, it didn't quite work. He brought on Paul Vanner, who's one of the new signings, who has done quite well, and is probably one of the Hearts fans should probably keep an eye on Thursday. He scored a goal in that extra time. It didn't count. And it led to this really interesting kind of tension in the post-match press conference, where a lot of the kind of journalists who follow the club, who are from that area, as we would call them, kind of beat reporters for Heidenheim, were kind of saying to Schmidt, like, look, is this an example of how this team just doesn't have the depth to play in three competitions? And it felt like it really struck a nerve. He really kind of pushed back. He was like, look, if you think the backup players are good enough, then that's your problem. I've got nothing to worry about. We're going to go Holstein Kiel. We finished that game strongly. We're going to win there and everything's going to be fine. They go to Kiel and lose. And it has been kind of this kind of running trend where Schmidt probably is trying his best to try to transition this team onto, new players. And Paul Vanner is probably the perfect example. He's a young attacking midfielder from Bayern Munich, plays like kind of number 10 or as a second striker. And he's done really well, but he's a very different type of player to, for example, Kleindienst, who's a very traditional kind of target man in the box. And if you kind of look at the way that Heidenheim do play this season, they're maybe not counter-attacking as well as they used to do, or maybe not getting as many crosses into the box, although they still are. There's just not those same players in the box to do that. Because I think, for example, if I was Hearts, I probably would be expecting to play a team in Heidenheim who will still very much focus on getting the ball down the wings. Both fullbacks, Foreign-Back and Bosch on the right, are quite high in the league standings for crosses into the box. So they still focus a lot of their attention to playing the way they did last season. They just don't really have the service on either wing, so they're relying on the fullbacks now. And they also don't have that big target man in the box to kind of knock it home. And instead, they've got Paul Vanner, who's very good. He can be a very good poacher. He can be very good with the ball at his feet. But I wouldn't really call him a target man. So they're a team in transition, there's no doubt about it. And I suspect they probably will be okay to avoid relegation. But at this moment in time, things are very tricky for them. And they are trying to kind of find their feet with a lot of things.
And on that, I was looking at in terms of their style and system, how you expect them to set up at Tynecastle. It seems like the Frank Schmidt has changed system a couple of times this season, but what can kind of What can Hearts expect? Kind of. Sorry. What can Hearts expect? No worries. What can Hearts expect in terms of the system to play? You said about their style and kind of they were quite direct. They are quite direct, but they're kind of transitioned away. How do you think they'll set up at Tynecastle?
I think they'll probably set up quite defensively and try to counter-attack Hearts. They've had quite a lot of success in Europe so far, but they have played smaller clubs. And I think they are probably prioritising European football in a sense because it's obviously probably a once-off opportunity for the club as a whole. So they are kind of putting their eggs in that basket, if you will. If you kind of look at where they have picked up wins this season against the likes of Mainz and St. Pauli, these are obviously teams who are the bottom of the half of the table. That they've obviously thought, well, we can go toe-to-toe these guys, so we're going to try and do exactly that. So they'll sit defensively. They'll probably try and counter-attack Hearts. I suspect they'll probably show them a degree of respect, but probably still think we need to try and bounce back from the last two results. Schmidt alone obviously would think that because he may be feeling a bit of pressure. Not pressure to the extent he might feel for his job, but you can tell that these poor results recently are definitely getting to him. And they'll probably feel like a strong performance against Hearts will be a necessity. And that's probably where we'll probably see Heidenheim try to sit deep, counter-attack, but then they would try to exert themselves on the game, because against smaller clubs in the Bundesliga who are thereabouts around them, in terms of quality, man for man, they do try to kind of grow into games. If you kind of look at the way that they score goals, I think I jotted it down here. 7 of their league goals this season have come after the 60th minute. So they do tend to finish games quite strongly, particularly matches where they are kind of going toe-to-toe with teams. And that's probably why that Holstein Kiel result of the weekend was such a kind of bizarre outlier, because I would have put my money on them winning that game just because they've struggled against bigger teams. But typically they do quite well against other sides because they do still have the structures in place. They're still relatively playing the same system under Schmidt, and the players still want to play for him. You know, it's not as if it's a team here who've lost their head or anything like that. So I think Hearts will be in for a hard game. By no means, I've got no doubt about it. But I wouldn't say it's an impossible task for them by any means.
What would you say that the strengths and weaknesses of Heidenheim are? What are the aspects of Heidenheim's game that Hearts will need to be wary of? But also on the flip side, how do teams get at Heidenheim? How would Hearts get joy against them?
Yeah, I mean, I think they still create a lot of chances. I think that's what the key thing. And like I said earlier on, they're still kind of focusing a lot on that wing play. The two fullbacks, Forenbach and Bush, are still really quite impressive across the Bundesliga as a whole in terms of getting crosses. And if I was the Hearts head coach, the Hearts manager, I would be saying, we find a way to kind of close those guys down and make sure I know it's quite hard to maybe cut off service to a fullback because they're obviously already in defence. But that's the kind of danger zone that Heidenheim will be looking at. If they can kind of start moving up the pitch, if they can kind of park themselves in the halfway line and start swinging crosses into the box, that's when you'll know that they're beginning to exert their dominance on the game, and that's when they'll know that they're hoping to try and score goals. Like I said, they don't really have that kind of big target man like Kleindienst was there last season. They still do have 2 or 3 strikers who are doing relatively well, a lot of them very young. Like I said, Paul Vanner is definitely the standout one there. To the extent that, you know, some people at Bayern Munich think he could potentially be a Bayern Munich star one day. So he is a real young player in the making, and he's the one who has kind of been the guy who stepped up and scored goals for them in these kind of ties, particularly against your Mainz's and your St. Pauli's and things. So I'd be keeping an eye on him, and I'd be keeping an eye on both fullbacks if I was the Hearts head coach.
And what about the weakness side of things? Where do they struggle? How can Hearts get at them?
They're quite poor at conceding early goals this season. It's definitely kind of been a running theme for them. Defensively, they're probably not as strong as they were last season. I think a lot of that's just down to the fact that they just don't really have the attacking players in attack. That like I mentioned, Dinky and Besta, who were the two wingers last season. So they don't really have that attacking dominance or that kind of ability to kind of pressure teams and then kind of break them down. So it seems almost like because Heidenheim do kind of march up the park, try to create chances, but they don't finish them like they used to, or maybe the service into the box isn't quite what it was it comes back down the pitch more often than it used to, and that's when teams do kind of have a go at them. And they've got decent defenders, got decent goalkeeper, but by no means they're kind of league leaders by any means. And like I said, they are a team who what's what I'm looking for? Overperformed. That's what I was looking for last season with these kind of individual star players, and obviously since they've moved on, they've kind of reverted back to what I would say is a kind of lower mid-table team in the Bundesliga. So if I was Hearts, I'd be definitely trying to get at them from the get-go. I'd be looking to try and score early goals from them. And then at that point, you're really kind of forcing them to attack Hearts rather than their more preferred role of kind of sitting deep and counter-attacking. So I think there's definitely goals to be had in this against this Heidenheim defence. And if you can kind of close down those fullbacks and Paul Vanner, then you could be on a route to success there.
And I know it's probably difficult to answer that, and I probably answer this because you're not in the Heidenheim press pack, etc. But what do you think the view is from Heidenheim looking at Hearts and coming to Tynecastle, and what they would consider success, what they are kind of expecting to do?
Yeah, well, I say typically German football has a lot of respect for Scottish football. It sees our league as a very kind of traditional league with a lot of prestige, a lot of fan support. So I would be very surprised if Heidenheim didn't show up at Tynecastle with a huge amount of respect for Hearts. I would go so far as to say they were going to show up to try and win. If I had to guess in terms of the quality of both teams, I would say this is certainly a game that Hearts could and probably should be looking to try and win. And based on Heidenheim's recent form, I'd be quite surprised if they were able to go there with the confidence to win this game. So I think they'd probably be hoping to take a draw and a good performance, which is probably more important than anything else at this point in time, because they got knocked out of the German Cup. They lost to the worst team in the Bundesliga, which set off huge alarm bells. And even though they have won their first two fixtures in the Conference League, a defeat here as well would maybe start setting off even more alarm bells. We'll say, right, we need to find a way to kind of not so much stop the rot, but when your team's in a bad run of form, all you're kind of hoping for is some sort of result to kind of stem that. That could be in Edinburgh, but I would probably say Hearts are, the team. I think looking at Heidenheim, I think they certainly shouldn't be, threatened by them or intimidated by them. I think it's a team that Hearts can definitely have a go at.
Nice one. I mean, when I was doing a wee bit of research on Heidenheim, I was thinking, because I'm just, you take it from kind of different sources in terms of looking at a wee bit of stats, looking at their form, the players, the transfer business, Opta's club rankings, and you kind of compare them and think, on paper, this seems like Hearts' most difficult game in the league phase, but then at the same time, I'm thinking they're there to be got at, and then having spoken to you, I'm thinking, well, I really fancy Hearts to win.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping I haven't put any kind of false hope in the Hearts fans. Only thing I'd also say is that the way the German teams do typically play, it is like, it's why we named our podcast Gegenpress. It's obviously the tactic that German football's famous for, but that tactic only works if you're Jurgen Klopp and you have Lewandowski up front and Mario Götze behind you or whoever else. And a lot of the kind of mid-table teams play a kind of little version of gegenpressing, which is very much kind of punt and run. Very quick. It's very fast. Don't get me wrong. It's very kind of in your face, but it's not 100 times dissimilar from the way that Scottish football's played. So I mean, I'm sure Hearts fans maybe roll their eyes at the thought of me comparing their football to gegenpressing. But what I mean by that is we play a very high pace of football in Scotland as well, and I think sometimes that might actually play in our hands when we play teams of equal standing. So. Yeah, I mean, if it was a Spanish team who are down their luck, I'd maybe be saying be wary, because at the end of the day, they can still pass it around a decent Scottish team. But when it comes to a Bundesliga side, I think the two kind of cultures and the kind of the tactics might match up quite well, actually, and might suit Hearts in this game.
Yeah, so that's so Hearts we have struggled against teams that kind of sit in and play a low block, and that's looking at what Heidenheim are about in terms of counter-attacking, and they don't seem to want the ball too much. They don't want to be kind of protagonists. I was thinking, and that's where it was interesting for me. It's like, as a Bundesliga team, would they come to Tynecastle and be so standoffish? And so that's why I think it's going to be quite a kind of fascinating game, because Hearts ideally don't want to have too much of the ball, and it doesn't seem like Heidenheim do. Like, it seems like both both teams are more threatening when they are not controlling 55-60% of the possession.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a game I watched recently by Heidenheim, not recently, it was the start of the season, when they went to the Westfalenstadion to play Dortmund, and they lost the game 4-2. But they kind of came back into the second half, and they could have taken a point off Dortmund that day. And that's not to say that Heidenheim are good. I mean, Dortmund are really dreadful this season, so I take that with a pinch of salt. But the reason that Heidenheim were able to get back into that game was because Dortmund just turned it into a box-to-box kind of riot. Really, they had no kind of control over the game. They had no ability to kind of pass the ball, keep the ball, and take the sting out of the game. So Heidenheim eventually got back into it because, like I said, they are still at their core a counter-attacking team. So if you keep throwing attacks at them and losing the ball, they will eventually keep going. And like I said, they have scored a lot of the goals in the second half, or even the last kind of third of games this season. So they do kind of have this never say die approach to games. And under Frank Schmidt, they've still got a huge amount of morale in that team. But I think that's just something to be wary of. If Hearts do kind of turn it into this kind of box-to-box affair, then that might suit Heidenheim in the end. But I think Hearts could have a lot. I think Hearts should definitely be looking to try and win this game. I'd put it that way.
Perfect, Stefan. Well, thank you very much for giving us a lowdown on Heidenheim. I am. If I wasn't looking forward to this game before, I very much am now, because I think it could be just what you're talking there in terms of potentially box to box. It could be quite an interesting game, and because I think especially European games, when there's a wee bit of chaos at Tynecastle, it always seems to add to the atmosphere. So let's see what that brings. But thank you very much, and I will put Geg Pressing podcast details in the description when this goes up. And thank you very much, mate, and I will catch you soon. All those listening, we will have all the kind of build-up and analysis pre- and post-match on heartstandard.co.uk throughout the week, so do check that, and be sure to subscribe and like the YouTube channel. But until the next time, thank you and goodbye.